Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Story Sleeper. Tonight we meet real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to easily unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I parked off a dirt road just before dusk. About an hour outside of Moab, nothing official, just a little clearing behind some scrub flat. Enough to pitch a tent. I'd been doing these solo desert trips for a while. No cell reception, no real plan. Just a weekend to clear my head. The day had been normal, hot, dry. A little wind, I set up my tent around 6, cooked some instant rice and beans on the little camp stove, drank a beer, and watched the sunset. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. More like a weird, empty silence. No birds, no bugs, nothing moving, but I chalked it up to being out in the middle of nowhere. After dark, I built a small fire. Nothing big. I didn't want to draw attention, just enough to sit by for a while. I wasn't tired yet, so I stayed out there with my boots off, poking at the fire with a stick, and listening to the wind come and go. At one point, I thought I heard something walking behind me, maybe 20 or 30 feet out, but when I stood up and shined my flashlight around, there was nothing, just creosote bushes and rocks. I told myself it was probably a jackrabbit or something. It was close to midnight. When I finally zipped into my tent, I'd left. Through the daylight, I'd done a few of these before. Not fun, but peaceful. In a way, quiet. You start to feel like the woods are your whole world. The weird stuff started on the second morning I woke up and went to grab my multi-tool from the rock. I'd left it on by the tent, and it stuck slightly to my hand when I picked it up. Just a small tug, like static. Cling or something. But it was enough to make me stop and check. When I set it back down on the rock, it kind of twitched and slid a little toward my hand as I hovered over it. I didn't think magnetism at first. I thought maybe I was overt tired, or the rock was sloped or something. But later when I clipped the tool onto my belt, I noticed my wrench sticking slightly to the back of my glove, and my spare carabiner felt weirdly hard to pull off my harness loop, like it was caught on something by the time I got up the first pole that morning. The little nuts and bolts I'd brought in a side pouch were clumping together inside it, like they'd all been magnetized. It was subtle, but definitely not normal. My gloves started picking up fine metal shavings from my file, like they were dust. At one point, I set my screwdriver on a rock, and it stayed upright, wobbling just slightly, like it had been pulled into place. None of my electronics were acting up. The voltmeter was reading fine. My headlamp still worked. But the magnetism thing kept happening throughout the day. I'd stop working and try to test it, just out of curiosity. Sometimes things would stick, sometimes not, but it kept happening just enough to feel off. And it was only with the tools I'd brought with me, not the metal on the poles or the line hardware that night. I sat in the camp with my headlamp off, just watching the sky while I ate it. It was clear, full of stars. Cool breeze, absolutely silent. Then I saw this brief flash, maybe half a second long way up high above the trees. Not like lightning, more like a camera flash behind a thin sheet. No sound. Nothing followed it. I figured maybe a meteor or distant plane. Catching sunlight, I waited for more, but that was it. The next morning, the magnetism was gone. Tools acted normal. Nothing stuck together. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Went back to work like usual, but around midday, I started noticing something up in the canopy. I was on a slope that gave me a good angle up through the trees, and at first I Thought it was just sun glare or weird bark patterns. But there were shapes in the treetops. Faint but real circles. Mostly, but not natural-looking ones. Too perfect, some of them overlapped in precise arcs, like stencils. And they weren't carved or broken branches. They looked more like discoloration, like the needles themselves had been lightly scorched. I climbed up one of the poles to get a better view from higher up. I could see more of them spread across, maybe about 4 miles of canopy. Just faint rings and intersecting lines, maybe 20 feet wide. Each like some kind of pattern had been traced across the forest from above. Not burned deep, just singed enough to change the color of the leaves. You wouldn't notice from the ground unless you were really looking. I started to feel really uneasy. Then I didn't hear anything, didn't see anyone, but I kept catching myself turning around like I'd heard a branch snap, or like someone had walked up behind me every few minutes. I'd stop and just listen. Total silence, but it felt heavy, like the air was waiting. I finished out the day early, packed up and radioed in no response. But that wasn't unusual in that area. I decided I'd hike out the next morning and call from the truck that night. I couldn't sleep. The tent felt too exposed, even with the rainfly zipped, and my headlamp within reach. Around 2 or 3 a.m. I stepped outside to piss, and just stood there for a while trying to get my nerves under control. That's when I saw the glow. It was coming from deeper in the woods. Not bright, more like a soft dome of light, filtered through the trees, blush white, and not flickering like firelight, not moving like a flashlight. It just sat there. I couldn't see a source, just this hazy illumination. Maybe 200 yards out, low to the ground. I crouched and watched it for a long time. It didn't move, didn't change. It was dead silent. No insects, no wind, no animal sounds. I thought about going toward it, but I couldn't get my legs to move at some point. I must have gone back into the tent because I woke up fully dressed with my boots on, stiff from sleeping half sitting against the sidewall. It was morning gray light through the trees. The glow was gone. I packed everything as fast as I could, skipped breakfast, and hiked out in just over an hour on the drive back. I kept checking the rear view like something was going to come up behind me on the road. Nothing ever did. I turned the gear, and back at the depot, and didn't say anything about what I saw. The magnetic stuff was gone by then. The tools were normal. I don't even know how I would have explained the treetop markings without sounding like a lunatic. A few weeks later, I checked satellite maps of the area just out of curiosity. No clearings or structures. Where I'd seen the light, nothing but trees. I zoomed in as far as I could, but the resolution wasn't good enough to make anything out. I haven't taken another solo job since we were somewhere between Tonopah and Caliente out on Route 6. Middle of the Nevada desert, and it was late, like after midnight. But the kids had finally passed out in the back, and my wife was dozing with her head against the window. I had the radio low, and the cruise set at 70, just trying to knock out the long stretch before our motel in Caliente. It was empty out there. No other headlights, no gas stations, nothing. Just that 2-lane highway, and scrubs stretching out forever in both directions. The kind of place where the sky feels too big and too quiet. I kept checking the rear view, like I expected someone to come up behind us. But there was never anyone there. About halfway between Warm Springs and Lunar Crater, the radio fuzzed out. Not like a slow fade, just gone. Like someone cut the power. The screen still showed the station name, but no sound. I tried scanning. Nothing. Every channel was just static. Then the GPS started acting weird. It kept recentering the route, like it was trying to relocate us, even though we were obviously still on the same road. The little arrow would slide a few hundred feet off the highway and then snap back. My phone lost signal. At the same time, no bars. My wife's phone too. Not even roaming. I didn't say anything at first because I figured it was just a dead zone. But I did glance at the dash clock. It said 1:18 a.m. A few miles later, the headlights picked up something on the side of the road. Not a car, just a shape, like a tall figure standing still. Right where the shoulder met the dirt, I slowed down a little. It didn't move. I couldn't make out any details. Just the outline. No reflective gear. No flashlight. Just standing there in the dark, my wife stirred and asked why I was slowing down. I told her I thought I saw something. She looked, but by then it was behind us. About 10 minutes later, we saw lights ahead. At first, I thought it was another car coming toward us. But as we got closer, I realized it wasn't moving. Just two lights side by side, maybe 20 feet away off the road. When we passed them, I glanced out the driver's side window and realized they weren't headlights. They weren't even attached to anything. I could see. They were just hovering there, a few feet off the ground. Bright white, not glaring, not flickering perfectly. Still, my wife saw them too. She sat up straight and asked, "What is that?" I didn't have an answer. We kept going. The lights disappeared behind us. Still, no signal. No GPS. The road just kept going like it had for the last hour. Flat straight, nothing on either side. I was starting to feel wired, like the air was too thin or something. Like I was holding my breath without realizing it then. The engine hiccuped. It wasn't a stall, just a quick drop, like everything lost power. For half a second, the dashboard blinked. The headlights dimmed and the cruise control kicked off. I had to tap the gas to keep us steady. The car never fully died, but for a second, it felt like it might. The kids didn't wake up. My wife grabbed the armrest, but didn't say anything. She just looked at me, waiting for me to explain what was happening. I looked down at the clock again. It still said 1:18 a.m. That's when I noticed the sky. It had been clear all night. But now the stars were gone. Not clouded over, just gone. Like a black sheet had been pulled across the sky. No moon, no glow, nothing. I even rolled the window down to check if it was tinted. Weird, but no just darkness above us. Like something had blocked everything out. We drove like that for maybe 10 more minutes. No sound, but the tires on the pavement. The air felt thick, like pressure was building. I remember my ears popped, like we were gaining altitude fast, even though the road was flat. Then, just as fast as it had all started, everything snapped back. The radio crackled and came back on. Mid-ong, my phone buzzed with missing notifications. The GPS lit up and recentered. The sky was clear again. Stars back, moon, low over the horizon. The pressure was gone. It felt like we had passed through something, but there was no marker for it. No sign, just desert. Same as before, I glanced at the clock again. It said 3:36 a.m. I thought it was a glitch. I assumed the car clock had frozen, and just now corrected itself. But then the GPS route updated, and we were suddenly less than 20 minutes from Caliente. We had been at least 2.5 hours out. When the radio cut, I didn't say anything. My wife didn't either. We just looked at each other. Neither of us wanted to be the first to ask the obvious question. I checked the trip counter. It hadn't jumped the mileage. Made sense. The gas level too, but the time didn't. We got to the motel just before 4:00 a.m. The clerk barely looked up when I signed in. The kids didn't wake until late morning. None of them had any weird dreams. Nothing strange. My wife kept checking her phone, like she was expecting something. But she never said what. We never figured out. What happened during those missing 2 hours? I used to spend a lot of late nights in my garage messing with radios. I've been into shortwave since high school. Just something about scanning around and catching weird stations from halfway across the world. I'm not licensed or anything serious like that. Just one of those guys with a shelf full of gear and a beep of antenna strapped to the roof. This happened last November. Around 2 in the morning, my wife was already asleep upstairs, and I'd come out to the garage to tinker around, mostly just flipping through bands out of boredom. It was one of those dry, windless nights where everything feels kind of muted. No wind, no bugs, just that soft hum from the street lamp outside, and the occasional creak from the water heater. I had my Grundig set up with the loop antenna plugged in, just slowly sweeping the bands like I always did, and a lot of static. Occasional snippets of weird foreign broadcasts. The usual. I wasn't expecting to pick up anything interesting. Most of the traffic that time of night is just garbage. Then I landed on something around 9.4 megahertz that wasn't quite right. It started as this low, steady pulse, like a metronome. But duller, it didn't sound natural. No voice, no modulation. Just this dry electronic tick. About 1 every second. I listened for a bit, figured maybe it was just one of those utility stations, or a test tone from a military frequency. But then it changed the tick, doubled in speed, then tripled, then dropped back down. I didn't touch anything. The frequency stayed locked, but it started forming a pattern. 3 fast ticks. Pause 1. Long tick. Pause, then 5 short ones in a row, then it repeated. I grabbed a notebook and started jotting it down. I do that sometimes when I catch odd transmissions. Just for fun, really. But this one kept going exactly the same, over and over. 3 short, 1. Long, 5 short. Then pause. Then again, like clockwork. I listened to that loop maybe 20 times, thinking it might be Morse, but it didn't line up. I mean, maybe loosely, but it didn't translate into anything. It wasn't a message, at least not in any format I recognized. But it felt deliberate, if that makes sense, like someone or something was trying to draw attention without actually saying anything. After about 10 minutes of that, I decided to record it. I had my little digital recorder I usually use for samples. I hooked it up, hit record, and switched back to the frequency silence. Not static, just nothing like the signal had been yanked. I thought maybe I bumped the antenna, or a cable came loose. But everything looked fine. I tuned a little up and down the band, thinking maybe it shifted. But it was just dead air. The whole section of the spectrum felt empty, not even the usual fuzz. I unplugged the recorder, switched everything back to how it was before, and suddenly the static came back. Not the signal that was gone, but the general background noise. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, scanning up and down to find it again. Nothing. I left the radio on while I got up to stretch. The garage felt weird. Colder than it had a minute ago. Not freezing, but off, like how a room feels. After someone's just walked through it, I opened the side door and stepped out onto the driveway to get some air. Everything was quiet. I live at the edge of a neighborhood cul-de-sac. Not out in the sticks, but not dense, suburban either. We've got a few motion sensor lights and they were all dark. No wind, no cars, just dead still. When I turned to go back in, I noticed the porch light flicker. Once, then stay off. Figured it was a loose bulb. I walked in, flipped the switch off and back on. Nothing, the breaker was fine. All the other lights in the garage were still working. I went back to the desk, powered the radio off, then on. Again, ran through the usual bands. It was like someone had wiped the whole slice of air clean. I don't know how else to say it. You get used to a certain level of clutter on shortwave interference, buzz drift. But this was silent, like someone turned off the world behind the static. About an hour later, I gave up and went inside. Checked the clock on the oven. G13, my watch, said 3:24. I remember squinting at it, trying to remember if I'd set it wrong or if the power had gone out, but everything else in the kitchen was on time. I woke up later that morning feeling wired and kind of off, like I hadn't really slept, even though I'd been out for hours. The first thing I did was check the recorder. There was a file on it. 12 seconds of me plugging in the cable. Then, silence. Not even hiss that whole day. I kept thinking about that pattern 3. Fast 1. Long 5. Fast, I caught myself writing it down again. At work, like it was stuck in my head, I ran it through some online Morse decoders, tried treating it like binary, looked up numbers, stations, archives. Nothing matched. It didn't exist, at least not anywhere I could find the next night. I went back out, tried to replicate the setup exactly same, frequency same, antenna same, gear. Nothing. I even left the recorder running for an hour just in case. Picked up a couple weird bleeps from South America, and what might have been Russian naval traffic, but not that pulse. I tried for a week straight. Same time, same band. It never came back, but here's the part that really stuck with me. A few nights later. Around the same time, 2:15 or so. I was out back, letting the dog out. It was cold and clear. I looked up, just kind of zoning out, and I saw what looked like a satellite, one of those steady, slow-moving dots crossing the sky. Except this one stopped right above the house, dead, stopped, no wobble, no drift, just hung there for maybe 10 seconds. Then it blinked once and faded out. I didn't tell my wife about any of it. Just said I was having issues with the radio, and left it at that. I packed up most of my gear the next day, still have it, just haven't touched it since, not sure why. Nothing really happened, but it's like something opened for a second, then shut again. And I was just close enough to know I wasn't supposed to be there. I was driving back from a friend's place out in the country, about an hour and a half from where I live. It was almost midnight. When I left later than I meant to, and I took back roads most of the way. Flat open farmland. Not much traffic lane. Roads, no streetlights. The kind of route where you don't pass another car for 20 minutes at a time. It was quiet. I had the radio off, windows cracked a little, just cruising. I wasn't tired, but I remember feeling kind of spaced out. You get that way. Sometimes on those long, empty drives, like you're the only person awake in the whole world. I noticed the blinking light. Maybe 15 minutes in, it was off to the right, low in the sky. White, steady blink. Not fast, not random. About every 2 seconds. I figured it was a plane at first, or maybe a tower light. Way off in the distance, it didn't really bother me. Just something to look at. But it started getting weird when I made a left turn at a 4-way intersection. I wasn't thinking about the light, just following my jeeps, but after I turned, it was still in the exact same spot, off to the right. Same distance, same blink pattern, like it had turned with me. I slowed down and looked at it harder. It wasn't flashing red or green like a plane, just white, and always at the same rhythm. I thought maybe it was a drone. But who flies a drone? Way out there at night. After a few more turns, I started paying attention every time I changed direction. The light stayed at the same angle, always off to the right. Never closer. Never. Farther's like it was stuck to my car in the sky. Somehow, I rolled the window down more and stuck my head out while driving. No sound if it was a drone. It was flying silent. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder and turned the engine off just to see the blinking kept going. Same pace, it didn't move, didn't hover, or wobble, or drift, just blinked. Still off to my right above the cornfields, I sat there for maybe a minute, waiting for it to do something. Move. Fly off anything it didn't. So I started driving again. A few miles later, I passed a farmhouse with the porch light on. I had this brief thought about pulling in and asking if they'd seen it too, but I didn't. I don't even know what I would have said, hey? Hey, is there a weird light following me? I tried not to look at it after that. I focused on the road, tried to convince myself it was just some radio tower I kept seeing from different angles, but a couple more turns, and it still hadn't changed position. Then maybe 20 minutes from home, I drove through a little dip in the road, a kind of shallow valley, where trees lined both sides. I lost sight of the light for a bit. The road curved slightly. Left, then back right. When I came up out of the dip, the light was gone. I actually felt relieved for a second, like, okay, whatever it was. Maybe I just gotten out of range, or passed behind a hill, then I saw it again. In my rear view mirror. Same. Blinking. Same height. Same rhythm. Except now it was behind me. Not coming toward me. Just there. Like it had repositioned without me seeing it move. That was when I got really uncomfortable. I didn't feel like I was in danger exactly, but it was this deep, tense kind of feeling like something wasn't right, and I shouldn't be out there. I sped up. Not crazy fast, but faster than I'd been going. I kept checking the mirror. The light stayed behind me, never getting closer or farther. Always blinking. Always the same spot. About 10 minutes out from town. I passed another car going the opposite way, first one. I'd seen all night. I had this sudden idea. Maybe the light would follow them instead, like maybe it wasn't about me. Maybe it just picked random cars. But after they passed, I checked the mirror again. Still there. Still blinking. Turned onto the highway that runs into town. It's a little more built up, a few gas stations. Some traffic lights as the blinking light faded into the background. Once I got closer to the edge of town, too many other lights. I kept looking for it, but I couldn't spot it anymore. I pulled into a gas station and parked under the awning, just sat there for a bit, hands on the wheel, watching the sky. Nothing, just stars, a couple planes way up high. Regular stuff. I went inside to grab a water, didn't say anything to the cashier when I came back out. I looked around one more time. The light wasn't there. I drove home. No more. Blinking, no strange lights. Just normal night the next day. I checked online for any kind of tower map, just to see if there were any installations out there that might match what I saw. Nothing in the right spot. Anyway, it had moved with me. Towers don't do that. I still don't know what it was. Maybe there's a simple answer, and I just didn't think of it, but I've done that drive a dozen times since, and I've never seen anything like that again. I was working nights as a security guard for a corporate office park just outside Kansas City. It wasn't a bad gig, mostly. Quiet, mostly boring. A shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And I was usually the only one on site. Besides the occasional janitorial staff who came through once or twice a week, the security office was on the ground floor of the main building, right off the lobby. There were 9 monitors on the wall, each tied to different cameras around the property. Parking lots, loading docks. the main entrance, a couple interior hallways. We had motion alerts set up on a few of them, but they were overly sensitive. Sometimes a moth would trigger one. Sometimes wind. That night, I think it was mid-February, I was alone like usual. It was just past 2 a.m., I remember, because I just finished logging my hourly check and poured myself a coffee from the thermos. The monitors were quiet. 2 cars were in the north lot. One was mine. The other belonged to an admin who'd left it there over the weekend. No lights, no movement. I was scrolling on my phone when I caught something flicker on screen. It was camera 4, the wide shot of the south parking lot. It faced the side of the building and the lot beyond it. There were no cars parked over there, and the area wasn't especially well lit. The only light came from 2 poles near the perimeter, and the overhead glow from the building itself in the center of the screen, right where the painted lines met in a little T shape. There was someone standing there, not walking, not moving, just standing. They were far from the camera, maybe 100 feet out, but they looked human. Upright, still facing the building. No flashlight, no reflective clothing, no visible features. Just a person-shaped figure in the middle of an empty lot. At 2:13 a.m., I sat there and watched it for a few seconds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe a smudge on the lens, but I could see the shadow it cast under the pole light behind it, a thin, angled line, like it was real. I flipped the feed to zoom. The camera wasn't high, but it confirmed what I thought. Someone was just standing there, arms at their sides, not moving at all. I checked the motion logs. Nothing had triggered. No alerts. That made me pause. Usually it'd go off if a cat ran across the sidewalk. I waited another few seconds, still staring, then picked up my flashlight and radio and went out through the stairwell door. I didn't want to use the main lobby doors because they were all glass, and I didn't know if whoever it was could see in. I came around the side of the building, quietly keeping low behind the hedges. The lot looked empty. I didn't see anyone. I moved a little closer, aiming my flashlight out into the center. Where the figure had been, nothing, just painted asphalt and 2 empty handicap spots. Stood there for a long time, sweeping the light side to side, checking every angle. No movement, no footsteps. The lot was flat and wide open. You couldn't walk across it without being seen from at least one of the cameras. There was nowhere to hide. After maybe 3 or 4 minutes of looking, I went back inside. I figured maybe I'd misread the video, maybe a weird shadow or something. But when I got back to the security office and rewound the footage, it was still there, clear as anything. The figure stood in place for about 37 seconds, then just wasn't there in the next frame. No walking, no fading out, just there. 1 second gone, the next. No alerts, no motion trigger, nothing. I tried switching to the other angles, the adjacent camera that covered the back lot and the one above the stairwell door. I'd come out of, neither of them caught the figure at all, even though camera 5 should have had partial coverage of the same area. The spot where the person had been was just empty. I sat there for a while after that, just letting the monitors run. I didn't want to go back out around 3:45. Camera 4 flickered again. Same spot. I stared at the screen, and there it was again. Same posture, same spot. Standing under the pole light. Still no movement. This time I didn't go outside. I just sat and watched. My hands were kind of sweaty, and I kept double-checking the timestamps. It stood there for almost a full minute, then again, gone. Not walking away, not ducking out of frame, just gone between two frames. I saved both clips to the drive and made a note in the log that I'd had camera interference. Didn't say anything about what I saw at the end of my shift. I went out to check the lot again. In daylight, there was nothing there. No footprints, no trash, no scuff marks. I even checked the pole light for maintenance issues. Everything looked normal. When the day guy came in, I acted casual and didn't mention anything. I was halfway convinced I'd hallucinated it, or maybe dozed off for a second and dreamed it. But the footage was real. I watched it again that night. Before my next shift started, both clips clear as anything standing still. Then gone. The next few nights were normal. No figure, no weirdness. Then, about a week later, I came in for my shift and noticed camera 4 was offline. I called maintenance, and they said the unit had shorted out when they pulled it. The tech said the lens was burnt around the edges like it had been exposed to a ha-ha heat source. No explanation for it. They replaced it a couple days later. But I never saw anything like that again. I still have the 2 clips saved on an old USB somewhere, but I don't watch them anymore. Nah. I already know what I saw. We'd been out since just before dawn. It was late October, cool and damp, frost still clinging to the grass. When we parked the truck, me and Wes had hunted this patch of forest for years, just north of the state line, about 40 minutes from his place. We had tags, we had permits. We were doing it by the book. We'd split off early, met back around noon. To eat, then headed deeper into the woods. It was quieter out there, fewer trails, thicker trees. Not many people bothered going that far back unless they were serious about it. Around 2:30, we spotted movement across a gully. Something big didn't look like a buck too low to the ground. Moved different. We couldn't tell for sure, but we figured maybe a black bear could have been a hog. But it didn't have the right build. We didn't speak, just looked at each other, nodded, and started tracking it. We crossed the gully and found a trail. Heavy prints in the mud, but no real shape to them. Just deep dents like something heavy had passed through the brush was pushed down in a straight line. Not wandering like deer usually do. It wasn't running either. Just moving steady, like it knew where it was going. We followed it for a while, maybe 15 minutes. We were moving slow, careful not to make noise. I remember noticing how unusually still everything was. No wind, no birds, no squirrels. At first I figured maybe the animal had scared them off, but it felt like more than that, like the whole forest had shut off. I whispered something to Wes about it, but he didn't say anything. He just looked around like he'd noticed it too. The trail led us to a denser part of the woods. Big pines tight together. The ground softened under our boots with old needles and damp soil. That's when it started getting strange. The sound just stopped. I don't mean it got quiet. I mean it stopped. We both paused at the same time. I turned to say something to Wes and realized I couldn't hear my own footsteps. I tapped the butt of my rifle against the tree next to me, and it didn't make a sound. I could feel it in my hand, the vibration of the impact. But there was no noise, not muffled, not faint, just nothing. I looked at Wes, and he had this weird, frozen expression. He moved his mouth, but I didn't hear anything come out. I tried, saying his name. Nothing. There was no ringing in my ears, no pressure, like when your ears pop. It was like being underwater, but without the distortion, just complete silence. We stood there like that, for maybe a minute, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Then we noticed the light had changed. It wasn't darker exactly, but the shadows looked wrong. Softer, The sunlight filtering through the trees had this weird tint to it. Kind of silvery, hard to describe, but it didn't look natural. That's when we saw the thing above the trees. It was huge. Took up the whole sky above us. But not like a cloud or a storm. It was a solid shape, smooth and dark, almost black and with this faint shimmer around the edges, like heat rising off asphalt. No sound, no wind, just hanging there. Above the canopy, I couldn't make out details. Not really. No markings or lights. Just a big mat shape, maybe oval or diamond-shaped. The trees blocked most of it, but you could see the way the tops bent slightly, like they were being pulled upward. Not breaking, just leaning. I remember looking at Wes and seeing his hands shaking. I hadn't noticed mine were too. Neither of us moved. I don't think we could have if we wanted to. My legs felt like they were full of sand. Then slowly the silence started to lift. It wasn't all at once. First I heard a dry snap of a branch behind me. Then the faint rustling of leaves. Then, like someone turning up a volume knob. All the little forest sounds started to return. Birds chirping, wind in the trees. Distant insects. I turned back toward the sky and the huas. Object was gone. No movement. No sound. Just gone. We stood there, another couple minutes trying to process it. Was finally said something, just a quiet, "What the why was that?" And I felt this weird jolt, like I'd forgotten what his voice sounded like. We didn't talk much after that. We headed straight back toward the truck. Didn't even bother checking the trail. It felt like we'd walked into something we weren't supposed to see. When we got back, it was 4:40. The walk should have taken maybe 30 minutes. We'd lost over an hour somewhere, and neither of us remembered stopping that long. We didn't say anything to anyone. Didn't make a report. I didn't even bring it up again for almost a year. Then one night, we were drinking on Wes's porch, and he asked me out of nowhere, "You ever think about that thing in the woods?" I said. "Yeah, pretty often." It was during winter break. Sometime in late December, I was 16 and living at my parents' place out in a small town in central Oregon. Not totally middle of nowhere, but quiet. Not much light. Pollution, we had a decent-sized backyard, a couple pine trees at the edge of the property line, and beyond that, just empty fields for a few miles. Before the next subdivision, I'd gotten into stargazing around then. Nothing serious, just a cheap telescope from a garage sale and a free app on my phone that told you what you were looking at most nights. I just lay on a blanket with a hoodie and watched planes go by, or tried to find Jupiter. This happened around 11. At night, it was cold, but clear, crisp air. No clouds, I remember, because it was one of those nights where you can see your breath hang in the air for a second. Even when you're not exhaling hard, I'd brought out a thermos of tea and some headphones. But I hadn't started listening to anything yet. Just watching. I was looking up near Orion, trying to find the Horsehead Nebula, when I noticed 3 stars off to the side. Way higher and more east than where I was focusing. They weren't part of any constellation I recognized, and they were bright. Not moving, not blinking, like planes, just steady. White lights. 2 were sort of close together, and the third one was a little farther off, like a stretched triangle. I wouldn't have thought anything of it except they started to move, not fast. Slow enough that I wasn't even sure they were moving at first, but after maybe 10 seconds, I realized they were inching toward each other. The 2 closer ones drifted just a little. Then the third adjusted to match. All happened really gradually, like watching a clock hand move. But after about a minute, They'd formed a perfect equilateral triangle, and then they just stopped. Not wobbling, not drifting, locked in. I remember thinking how exact it looked, like someone drew it with a ruler, and it stayed like that. For maybe 30 seconds, huh? Noise, no trails, just completely still then. Just as slowly they drifted out of it, but not back into their original spots. They just sort of unraveled. Like the triangle shape never mattered. One peeled off to the left, another dropped slightly. They all kept moving, but not in sync anymore. After a minute or two, they'd completely lost the pattern. I sat up on my elbows and kept watching. I didn't know what to do. I remember looking at my phone to make sure it hadn't frozen or glitched. The time kept moving normally. After maybe 5 minutes of slow drifting, the 3 lights just dimmed, like someone slowly turned down a dimmer switch. One blinked out entirely. The others faded until I couldn't tell if they were gone or just blending in with the regular stars again. I sat there for a while longer, kind of frozen, just staring up eventually. I stood and scanned the sky to see if anything else looked off. Nothing did. Everything else looked exactly how it should. Orion was in the same place I found Polaris. Even checked the app again. No satellites were listed in that part of the sky, and no scheduled ISS pass. I was about to pack up and go inside, when I realized something weird about the backyard. It was quiet. Not the kind of quiet you get at night, but completely quiet. No wind, no distant cars, no barking dogs, no sound at all. That made me stop for a second, usually even at night. You hear something, an owl, a plane, distant highway noise, but it was like someone had stuffed cotton in my ears. It wasn't for long, maybe 10 seconds. Then a gust of wind kicked up, and the sound came back all at once, just back to normal. That part somehow bothered me more than the lights. I went inside and didn't sleep great. My chest felt tight for most of the night, like I'd just gotten startled, but never came down from it. The next night, I tried to find the same 3 lights, but the sky looked normal. I stargazed a few more times that week, but never saw anything like it again. Never told my parents. I think I mentioned it to a friend a few months later. Kind of like a joke, but I downplayed it. I've never seen anything like that since I was out behind my house with the camera trying to get some long exposures of the sky. This was last October. It was cold enough to see my breath, but I was layered up and had a thermos with me. My backyard backs up to a field, and then woods beyond that. No streetlights, no houses. For at least a mile in that direction. Good place for stargazing. I'd only gotten into astrophotography a few months before. Nothing fancy, just a decent DSLR on a tripod. Playing around with shutter times and trying to get clean shots of the Milky Way that night was especially clear. Crisp sky. No moon, no clouds. I'd already taken a few dozen photos and was letting the camera cool off while I drank some coffee. That's when I noticed one of the stars was moving. I don't mean it was a plane or a satellite. I know what those look like. I check flight radar sometimes, just to be sure this was slow, barely perceptible. At first it looked like a normal star. Same brightness, no blinking, no tail. I thought maybe my eyes were tired, or something was drifting across my vision. So I set the camera to live view, zoomed in, and aimed at it. And sure enough, it was dropping not fast, just slowly inching down the sky. Maybe a couple pixels every 10 seconds. It was coming straight down. No arc, no wobble. I watched for a solid minute before I started feeling uneasy. It didn't feel like something far away. Stars don't move like that. Satellites don't descend like that. And it wasn't a drone. I've flown. Drones, I know how their lights look. This thing didn't change shape, didn't flicker, didn't make any sound at all. I backed away from the camera and looked at it with my own eyes. Again, it was definitely lower than before, still small, still star-like. But now it was a little brighter, not dramatically, just enough to notice like it was getting closer. It kept dropping maybe half a degree every minute. At some point, it stopped looking like a star, and more like a bright dot. Just hovering there, maybe a few hundred feet above the tree line. Perfectly still. I realized then that everything had gone quiet. No crickets, no wind in the trees, not even the distant hum from the highway I usually hear. If I really listened, just stillness, like the world had paused. I turned the camera toward it and took a few quick shots, long exposure. 5 seconds each when I checked the screen. It wasn't there, nothing but black sky. I adjusted. The ISO increased the shutter time. Tried again, still nothing but. I could see it with my own eyes, clear. As anything that made me feel strange, not panicked, but off, like I was standing too close to something I shouldn't be seeing. I turned the camera off and just stared at it. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe minutes, maybe more. It didn't move, didn't change brightness, just hung in the air like someone had pinned it there. Then it blinked out, not faded, not drifted away. It was just gone. Like someone flipped the switch. And the second it disappeared, all the background noise came back. Crickets, a dog barking in the distance, a breeze rustling the grass. My ears popped slightly, like pressure had changed, and I realized my hands were shaking a little. I stayed out there for another 15 minutes, just in case it came back. It didn't when I finally packed up and went inside. I checked the camera card. All the photos from before the star started moving were fine. The later ones where I aimed directly at it were just black. Not even static or blur, just pure black. Like the shutter didn't open at all. The next morning, I went back out to the same spot and aimed the camera the same way. Tried to replicate it. Same settings. Same position shot normal. Night sky photos. Stars, planes. Even a faint satellite trail. Everything showed up fine. But whatever that thing was, it didn't register. It was just gone. I didn't tell anyone. For a few weeks on, then. I mentioned it to a guy at work who's into astronomy. He asked if it could have been a weather balloon. But that didn't make sense. Balloons don't stay perfectly still for 10 minutes in the same spot. And they don't just vanish midair. I still go out to shoot the sky sometimes. Sometimes, but I haven't seen anything like that again. Nothing that quiet, nothing that strange. We were cruising at 38,000 feet, yet somewhere over Nevada. I don't remember the exact time, but it was dark out, probably around 2 a.m. The weather was smooth, no turbulence, no clouds, just stars above, and the soft glow of cities way below one of those long, quiet overnight stretches where the autopilot does most of the work, and you're just monitoring gauges, chatting lightly, sipping lukewarm coffee. There were 2 of us up front, and my first officer. Dan, good guy, ex-military sharp. We were flying a standard passenger jet about 3/4 full. The cabin was dark and quiet. I just finished checking in with ATC and was flipping through the weather radar when Dan leaned forward, squinting out the left side of the cockpit. "You see that?" he asked. I looked where he was pointing low, and a little ahead of our nose, maybe 10 degrees off center. At first, I didn't notice anything, but then I caught a movement, a light, white, and steady. Not blinking like a commercial. Aircraft beacon. It was far off, too far to judge speed or altitude, but it stood out, especially that high up where there shouldn't be much else flying. We watched it in silence for a minute. It wasn't getting closer, just kind of holding position. I radioed ATC, asked if they had any traffic in our vicinity. At that altitude, negative. They said, only known traffic is. Your radar is clear at your altitude and above Dan. And I looked at each other. That was the first point where something felt off, civilian aircraft. Don't operate that high, especially not in the middle of the night, with no transponder, no clearance, and no lights, other than a single white glow. About 30 seconds after that, a call. The light moved. It didn't bank, didn't arc. It just slid sideways, smooth, like it was gliding on glass. It kept its distance, but moved from the left side of our nose across to the right, then stopped again. I've been flying for 20 years. I've never seen anything maneuver like that. No tilt, no drift, just a perfect lateral motion. Could be military, Dan said quietly. But he didn't sound convinced. I tried hailing it on guard. Frequency just in case aircraft. At my 11 on cock. This is November, etc. No reply, tried again. Nothing. The object started matching our movements. After that, I nudged the yoke gently to the left. Just a few degrees. The light mirrored us. Same direction, same speed, held formation for maybe a minute. I leveled out, so did it. I dipped down slightly, just enough to lose a couple 100 feet. The light mirrored that. Too perfectly, precisely like it was tethered to us by an invisible line. That's when my stomach started to knot. I don't scare easy up there. You learn to stay calm. Troubleshoot, run checklists. But this thing wasn't behaving like anything normal. No strobes, no heat signature on our IR sensors. It wasn't triggering any TCAST alerts. Nothing. We kept watching it mostly in silence. I think both of us were trying not to say what we were thinking. It stayed with us like that. For almost 10 minutes. Never got closer than a couple miles. Never drifted off. Just match speed and direction, responding to every tiny adjustment we made. Like it was studying us, or waiting for something then. And as suddenly as it had appeared, it shot straight up. No arc, no trail, no sound. Just an instant vertical climb faster than anything I've ever seen. 1 second it was there. The next, it was a pinpoint above us. Then, nothing, just empty sky and stars again. I checked the radar. Still clear. I asked ATC if they had anything above 60,000 feet. They said no. Nothing on any scope. No military exercises planned in that corridor. They asked if I wanted to file a report. I said no at the time. I just wanted to finish the route, land the plane, and put it out of my head. Dan didn't say much. The rest of the flight, neither did I. We both wrote notes afterward, just in case personal records. We didn't log it officially. We knew how that would go. They'd chalk it up to fatigue, atmospheric distortion, a weather balloon. Whatever, I've flown that route a dozen times since, never saw it again. Never saw anything like it. I was walking my dog around 9:30 at night. It had rained earlier, so everything was damp, and the air smelled like wet pavement and grass. We live in a quiet neighborhood. Older houses, big yards. No sidewalks, just 2-lane streets, and a lot of trees. I usually take the same route every night, past the same houses, same hedges and fences I dog. Lucy is a medium-sized mutt. Sweet, friendly, not the type to bark at random things. She's usually calm on our walks, unless we pass a cat. Or another dog that night. She was on edge, almost from the start. She kept stopping to sniff things she normally ignores. Mailboxes, puddles, a crack in the curb, and her ears were up the whole time. I tugged her along, figuring she was just distracted by all the new smells from the rain. About 15 minutes in, we were coming up the street that runs behind my neighbor's house. They've got a big yard that slopes down toward a line of trees with one of those short chain-link fences along the back. There's a tall wooden privacy fence along the sides, but the backyard itself is pretty open. Their porch light was off, but there was enough ambient light from other houses in the cloudy sky to see. That's when I noticed something crouched by the fence. At first I thought it was a deer, then I realized there were 3 of them. Not deer, smaller. Too small to be people, but too big to be raccoons or dogs. They were shaped kind of like kids, maybe the size of a 10-year-old, but with really thin limbs and big heads. They were crouched down, all 3 facing the fence, like they were doing something to it. Lucy froze. Her ears went straight up, and her whole body went rigid. She didn't growl or bark, just stared. I stopped walking and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It was too dark to make out any detail, but their skin looked pale, almost gray, in the ambient light. They weren't moving much. One of them shifted slightly, and the motion was weird, smooth, but jerky at the same time, like it wasn't used to how its joints worked. I stood there for a few seconds, unsure what to do. Then I cleared my throat and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" They all turned toward me at once. I don't know how to explain this part. They didn't look surprised or scared, just aware. Like I'd interrupted something. Their eyes reflected light like animals do, but not in the same way. It wasn't a red or green reflection. It was this dim, silvery gleam, like light off metal. They held still. For maybe a second, then, all 3 of them bolted. They didn't run like people or animals. It was fast, faster than anything that size should move, and totally silent. No footsteps, no rustling. Grass, nothing. They scattered in different directions, but not randomly. It was like they had pre-planned exits. One darted along the fence line and vanished into the trees. Another slipped between 2 bushes and was just gone. The third one moved toward the far corner of the yard and seemed to almost melt into the shadows. I tried to follow it with my eyes, but lost track of it. Halfway across the yard, Lucy started whining and tugged at the leash, trying to head back the way we came. I stood there for another minute, trying to convince myself I'd just seen some neighborhood kids playing a prank or something. But no kid moves like that, and there was no noise. None. No talking, no giggling, no sound of footsteps, just gone. I walked quickly after that. Not quite running, but close. I kept looking over my shoulder, and Lucy kept glancing behind us too. She didn't relax until we were a block away, and even then she was walking close to my leg, like she does during thunderstorms. When we got home, I locked the door and checked all the windows. I turned on the porch light, which I don't usually do, and left it on the rest of the night. I couldn't shake the feeling that those things had known I was watching them before I even spoke, like they were aware of me. The whole time, the next day, I walked past the same yard in daylight. Nothing looked disturbed. Grass wasn't trampled. Fence was fine. No footprints or anything unusual. I stood there for a minute, just looking at the spot where they'd been. But it felt different in the sunlight. Smaller, normal. I still walk Lucy every night, but I've changed our route. I don't go past that yard anymore, not because I think they'll be there again, but because I'm scared they won't be. It was around 3:15 in the morning, middle of a long haul between Laredo and Phoenix. I'd pulled out of El Paso a couple hours earlier and was deep into that stretch of I-10, where the road flattens out and everything just kind of blurs into empty desert. No towns, no exits, just headlights and blacktop. I'd stopped at a rest area back in Sierra Blanca to stretch my legs and take a piss. Checked my watch before getting back in the cab. I remember that, because I was trying to decide whether I'd make it to Lordsburg by sunrise or not anyway. Traffic was non-existent, just me and whatever was on the radio. I had the window cracked a little for fresh air, and was nursing a gas station coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. The road was dead quiet, except for my engine and tires. Humming along, that's when I saw the light. It wasn't headlights or anything like that. That it was a single orb, glowing kind of bluish white. Hard to say how big it was, but maybe the size of a basketball. It came from the right side of the road, low, maybe 10 feet off the ground, and crossed directly in front of my truck. Fast but smooth. It didn't bow. I hit the brakes, not hard, but enough to slow down just out of reflex. It was close, maybe 40 yards ahead, and gone in 2 or 3 seconds. They crossed the road and disappeared into the dark on the other side. No flash, no trail, just blinked out into the scrubland. I sat up straighter, blinked a few times, thinking maybe I just imagined it. But my heart was going a little faster, and I noticed my arms had goosebumps. I coasted for a bit before easing back on the gas. When I passed the spot where it had crossed, I slowed down again and looked out the side window. There was nothing, just rocks, low brush, and blackness. No fences, no utility poles, no towers. I rolled the window down all the way and leaned out. No sound, no wind, just empty. I looked down at my dashboard clock, and it said 313, which didn't feel right. I glanced at my watch again. I frowned, thinking maybe my dashboard clock had just reset or something. But I'd checked both earlier at the rest stop, and they'd matched. I remember checking because I'd been thinking about calling my wife and wanted to make sure it wasn't too late. The dash clock and my watch were both at 3:09 when I left. Now, they were 6 minutes apart. I tapped the clock, thinking maybe it was a glitch or bump in the road. Messed it up. But it was digital and locked in. I turned on my dome light, double-checked my wristwatch. Still 3:199. I remember holding my wrist up toward the dash, like I was waiting for them to sync back up or something. But they didn't. I drove a little while longer, just trying to shake it off, told myself. It was just a weird coincidence. The light, the clock. I'd zoned out for a minute, but that didn't sit right. I hadn't been tired, and 6 minutes isn't zoning out. That's a full-length song. That's 2 exits. That's enough time to know something's off. I kept glancing at the sky after that. I don't usually do that when I'm driving. It's just stars or clouds, and you've got to keep your eyes on the road, but I couldn't help it. I'd look up between billboards and check the rear view every now and then. Like I expected to see that light again. I didn't. About 30 minutes later, I passed a mile marker and realized I was making better time than I should have been. Not by much, maybe 6 or 7 minutes, but still it lined up too clean with the missing time on the dash clock. I checked both again. Wrist said 3:47. Dash said 3:41. I drove the rest of the way into Lordsburg without stopping, pulled into the truck plaza and parked. I got out, walked around the rig, checked the tires. Just needed to do something with my hands. Everything looked fine. No dings, no dents, no weird scorch marks or whatever. I half expected to find inside. I bought another coffee and made a dumb joke to the cashier about being the only one alive on that highway. She just nodded like she'd heard worse. I thought about mentioning the light, but didn't. Not sure why. I just didn't want to hear her tell me. It was probably a drone or swamp gas or whatever. Back in the truck, I synced the dash clock to my watch manually. It stayed in sync the rest of the trip, but I think about that light a lot. Not just how it moved or where it went, but that quiet. That totally dead silence when it passed. I drive through the desert all the time, and it's never completely silent. There's always some wind, a rattle, an engine, hum. But right then, nothing like the whole stretch of road held its breath. And those 6 minutes, I don't have a good reason for why the dash clock lost time, but the watch didn't. Or why it was only 6 minutes, or why it happened. Right when that thing flew by, I have seen all kinds of weird crap on the road. Accidents, people walking barefoot in the middle of nowhere, animals staring at you from the brush, but this was different. This didn't feel like something I was supposed to see. We were camped out near Crescent Lake, about 2 hours from town. 4 of us, me, Kyle Jordan, and Meg, all in our late 20s. We'd done that spot a couple times before, but never this late in the season. It was mid-October, cold enough at night that you had to layer up, but the daytime was still decent. No one else was out there. We didn't see a single other tent or car. The whole time, the first night was normal. We set up camp in the usual clearing just off the east side of the lake. There's a little trail that leads down to a flat, rocky area right on the shoreline. A kind of a natural overlook. We'd drag chairs down there and drink. Sometimes build a little fire in one of those cheap metal pits Kyle always brings. That's where we were the second night around 10:30, just hanging out. We noticed at first she was facing the water, and I was turned toward her, so I saw her freeze a little and narrow her eyes over my shoulder. At first, she didn't say anything, just kind of stared. Then she said, "What is that?" Not in a panicked way, more curious. I turned around. There was a light, maybe the size of a golf ball from where we were sitting, just floating over the lake. Maybe 100 yards out, and it wasn't bright. Not like a spotlight or anything more. Like the glow of a candle behind glass, yellowish flickering a little. We all stood up thinking maybe it was a boat. But it wasn't moving horizontally. It was rising slowly, just straight up. No sound, no ripple on the water underneath. I remember that part. Specifically, the water stayed perfectly still. It was like the light wasn't part of the lake at all. Like it wasn't touching anything. Just lifting away. Kyle said, maybe a drone, but it didn't have that steady motion drones usually have. It wobbled a little as it moved, kind of like a lantern caught in slow wind. Even though the air was completely still, you could hear us breathing. It kept going until it was maybe 60 feet up, then just stopped. Hovered. We stood there for a long time watching it. I checked my phone for a signal. Nothing. Which wasn't surprising out there. I tried to get a photo, but the screen wouldn't focus. It just showed a black blur. No detail. We stayed out there for at least an hour. Maybe more. The light didn't move much. It would drift a few feet to one side, then back again. Sometimes it dimmed almost to nothing, then came back a little brighter. It didn't pulse regularly, though. There wasn't a pattern. It just flickered like something alive. It made you feel like it was watching, not in a paranoid way, just aware of us. At one point, Meg whispered, "Do you hear that?" And we all went quiet. There was a very faint humming sound, but not electrical. More like when you plug your ears and you can hear your own blood, but external, low and soft. It came and went you. Couldn't be sure it was real. Then around midnight, the light started dropping slowly just like before. No sudden movement. It sank the same way it had risen, hovering down in a wobble until it touched the surface. And then, this is the weirdest part. Instead of reflecting off the water, it just disappeared into it. Like it was being absorbed, the glow got duller and duller until it was gone, and the lake was pitch black again. No splash, no wave, nothing. We stood there a long time after. None of us said much eventually. Kyle said he was cold, and we all went back up to the tents. The fire was mostly burned out, and we didn't restart it that night. I didn't sleep much. I wasn't scared exactly, just unsettled. I kept listening for the hum, or for footsteps, or something, but it stayed quiet around 3. I got up to pee and stepped out of the tent. The moon was out almost full. Everything looked normal. But when I looked at the lake, I had this feeling like something was under the surface just waiting. I don't know where that thought came from. I went back inside fast in the morning. We didn't talk about it right away. I think we were all waiting for someone to bring it up, Eli finally said. That thing was real, right? And we all kind of nodded. No one had an explanation. We packed up later that afternoon and left earlier than planned. A week later, I went back out by myself. Just for the day, I hiked down to that same spot, sat on the rock for a while. The lake looked totally normal. Same light breeze, same calm water. Nothing strange. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I shouldn't stay after dark. I left before sunset, and haven't been back since I was out hiking alone in the Blue Ridge Mountains. One weekend, in late September, I like to get away from the city. Noise, just wander around with a backpack, some water, and my camera this time. I decided to check out a remote valley trail I'd never been on before. It's one of those spots where the trail is barely marked, and the only people you might see are hunters or other hikers. But even they're rare. I started early around 7:00 a.m., and the weather was cool, but clear. The forest was quiet except for birds, and the wind through the leaves. After a few hours, I dropped down into this small valley surrounded by steep hillsides covered in thick underbrush and scattered pines. The sunlight filtered down in patches, and the air smelled like damp earth and pine needles I liked. It felt untouched. I was hiking along the edge of one hillside when I caught something out of place near a cluster of ferns. At first, I thought it was just some old trash, or maybe a piece of discarded gear, but when I got closer, it didn't look like anything normal. It was this small object about the size of a basketball. Embedded partly into the slope, the surface was metallic but oddly smooth, and a bit shiny, like aluminum, but darker, maybe a dull gray with a slight bluish tint. It reflected the sunlight strangely, but not like polished metal. More like brushed or weathered, except it didn't have any scratches or rust. What really got me was that it looked like it was pressed right into the earth. And rocks, the ground around it was a bit disturbed, like it had been pushed there with some force. There was no dirt on the surface itself, which was weird because it was wedged in at an angle. I took a few pictures but didn't touch it. It felt wrong to mess with it. I circled around it, trying to figure out what it might be. It didn't look like any kind of equipment or gear I'd ever seen. No wires, no markings, no seams or bolts. Just a smooth metallic oval shape, partly sunk into the hillside. I tried to listen for any sounds. Nothing. No humming, no vibrations. Just quiet. The forest seemed oddly still, like the birds had gone silent or stopped moving for a moment. It caught me off guard. I kept checking around, but everything looked normal except for the stillness. I stayed there, maybe 20 minutes, snapping photos and watching the light shifted as the sun moved behind some clouds, and the object's surface seemed to darken with the shade, but it didn't disappear or change shape. I kept wondering how long it had been there. It didn't look old, but I couldn't imagine anyone bringing something like that out here and just leaving it eventually. I decided to head back. I told myself it was probably just some piece of scrap metal, or maybe part of an old survey marker or something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't right the next day. I went back with my friend Matt. I wanted him to see it too, figure out if maybe I was just imagining things. We got there mid-afternoon after a short hike. When we reached the spot, the hillside looked empty. The metal thing was gone. The ground where it had been was smooth. No signs of disturbance or anything left behind. We searched around, looking for tracks or footprints. Anything that might explain it. Nothing, no signs. Anyone had been there overnight. No tire marks or paths. The dirt looked like it hadn't been touched in a long time. Matt was baffled and said, maybe I was seeing things, or mixed up the location, but I was sure I even showed him the pictures. I took the day before the photos were clear enough. The object looked the same, sitting there half buried in the hill. But when we looked back at the spot, it was like it never existed. I even tried to mark the place on my jeeps, and the coordinates matched where we stood still. The metal shape was gone. We spent the next hour walking the surrounding area, trying to find any clue where it might have gone, or if it was moved. No luck, the forest was quiet like the day before. Except this time, I noticed something else. A kind of distant droning sound, low and steady, barely audible, but definitely. There, it wasn't wind or traffic, just a soft mechanical hum coming from somewhere uphill. Matt didn't hear it, or at least he said he didn't. I wasn't sure if I was imagining that too. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that object and how it vanished. It didn't feel like something that just got taken away by a person, and I didn't see any signs of tampering around it. It felt like it was never there, or maybe it wasn't supposed to be there the next few days. I went back to the valley a couple more times. I tried to find anything unusual. Strange lights, noises, movements, but nothing, just normal woods. No sign of the metallic shape or the weird silence that came with it. I still think about that thing sometimes, when I'm out hiking, or even just sitting at home, like there's something out there, something watching or waiting that doesn't belong. And maybe I saw a glimpse of it, or a trace of it, but I don't know what exactly. I'm not a person who usually believes in weird stuff. I'm practical. But that thing, whatever it was, didn't fit with anything normal I know. And the fact it disappeared like that, well, I can't explain it. I was out for my usual late-night run. The kind where the streets are mostly empty, except for the occasional car or dog walker. It was just past midnight, a little cooler than usual for early May, and the sky was clear, with a handful of stars scattered above. Live on the edge of town, so there's less light pollution, which makes the night sky kind of intense. If you're into that, I'm not really into stargazing or anything. I just like running when the roads are quiet and my mind can clear. I was about 3 miles in, jogging along a stretch of road that runs beside some old farmland. The fields were empty, but the farmhouses scattered around had lights on here and there. My headphones were off because I prefer to run without them. When it's this late, I like hearing the world around me. Small sounds. My breath, footsteps on the pavement. I glanced up and noticed a single light hovering in the sky. At first, I thought it was a plane. There's an airport about 15 miles east of me, so it's normal to see planes passing over, especially at night. But this light wasn't moving like a plane normally does. It just hung there, stationary. I stopped running for a second and squinted. The light was dim but steady, not blinking like a commercial plane's lights would. After a few seconds, it started to rotate slowly, like it was turning in place. That was the moment it felt weird. I mean, I've never seen a plane just stop mid-air like that, let alone spin around on the spot. There was no engine noise either. Nothing. Usually. When a plane's nearby at night, you can hear that constant drone, even if it's faint. But this was dead silent. I stood there frozen, watching it rotate. The light shifted from white to a pale blue, then back again. Kind of like those old disco balls, but slower and smoother. I tried to figure out what it was. A drone could be, but the size looked bigger than any drone I'd seen, and the smooth rotation didn't make sense. Also no. Blinking lights. Like drones usually have for safety. Then, just as slowly as it had started, the thing stopped rotating and locked in place, hovering maybe 300 feet above the road. I could barely make out a shape. A vague silhouette that was kind of oval, or maybe triangular. From what little I could see, I'm not good at judging distances in the dark, but it was definitely close enough to be big. Then it moved. It darted away from me in a blink, but not in a straight line. It angled sharply like a bird, banking hard, but way faster. If you've ever seen a plane try to turn, it's usually a wide curve. Not this sudden. This thing turned like it was sliding on ice, just twisting its whole body mid-air and shooting off at an angle I didn't think was possible for any aircraft. It disappeared behind some trees at the end of the road. In seconds, I stood there for a moment trying to process what I'd just seen. I looked around to see if anyone else was out there. Nothing. No cars, no people. Just me and the quiet road. I started running again, but my legs felt heavier, and my breathing was off. I checked my phone. No notifications, no missed calls. The time was exactly 12:07 a.m. I kept glancing back toward where the thing disappeared, but nothing came out of the dark. A couple minutes later, I noticed my watch was a minute behind my phone. I figured I'd reset it a while ago and forgot. No big deal, but then, about a mile down the road, my phone screen flickered twice. It was weird. No app open, no calls or texts coming through. Just a quick flicker that, like the display, caught a glitch. I slowed down, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. Or something. The streetlights flickered too. Just for a second, I told myself it was probably just old wiring or a coincidence. But the whole time I felt like something was lingering nearby, just out of sight. When I got home, I checked my security cameras. Nothing unusual showed up on the front porch. Footage, no cars, no shadows moving against the driveway. The only strange thing was a faint glow reflected off a tree branch in the corner of the frame around 12:08 a.m. Right after the light disappeared, I haven't seen anything like that since I went back running a few nights later. Same route, same time. Nothing. No weird lights, no silence, no unnatural turns in the sky. Just normal cars passing and dogs barking. Somewhere down the street, I keep thinking about that light. Though how it hovered rotated silently, then zipped off at a crazy angle. I have no idea what it was, and it bugs me that it didn't make a sound or leave a trace. It wasn't a plane, not a drone, and it sure as hell wasn't a helicopter. I'm not one to jump to conclusions or get spooked by things I can't explain. But that night, it didn't add up. I guess some things just don't. The dog started barking around 3:17 a.m. every single night. Not just once or twice, but like clockwork for a week straight. It was weird because we live out in the country, and usually the dogs don't make a fuss, unless there's a raccoon or something rustling through the bushes. But this barking wasn't normal. It was sharp, urgent, almost like the dog was warning us. I'm not the most observant when I'm half asleep, but my son kept waking up, telling us the dog was going crazy outside. We have 2 dogs, but it was always the younger one, Max, doing this. His bark wasn't like a threat, more like confusion or fear. It started to creep me out after a few nights because I'd check the clock every time I heard it. And sure enough, it was always 3:17, give or take a minute or two on the 3rd night. I got out of bed to see what was going on. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and opened the back door slowly. The yard was dark, the moon just a sliver, barely lighting up anything. Max was standing at the edge of the porch, his hackles up, eyes fixed on the far corner of the yard. Nothing was moving, but he wouldn't stop barking. I stepped out, calling his name softly, trying to get him to calm down. Then I noticed something odd. The air felt different, not cold, but heavy, like the quiet before a storm, the usual sounds of the night crickets. The rustle of leaves, distant frogs all seemed to drop away. It was dead silent except for Max's barking. I didn't see anything, but the feeling wouldn't go away. So I went back inside and locked the door behind me. I told my wife about it the next day, but she brushed it off, said, "Dogs sometimes get spooked by things we don't notice." Fair enough. The next night, same thing, Max barking at exactly 317. This time, my wife and I decided to check the security cameras we'd installed a few months ago. After a string of break-ins in the neighborhood, we figured maybe there was someone lurking around, or a wild animal close by. We rewound the footage to the time of the barking. The video showed the yard. Clearly, the porch light casting long shadows over the grass. But then something really strange happened, right when Max started barking. The screen flickered with static for a split second. Nothing unusual there. Cameras sometimes glitched. But when the image cleared, Max was gone. No dog in the yard at all, just empty grass and shadows. I rewound it and played it over and over. Max had been inside earlier, and the timestamp was right. We heard him barking, but the camera showed no sign of him stepping outside the footage. Right before and right after that glitch showed the yard empty. The glitch lasted less than 2 seconds, but it was enough to erase Max from the video completely. I checked the other cameras around the house, but none of them caught anything unusual. Just a weird static glitch on the one facing the backyard. I showed it to a friend who's into tech, but he said it could be a minor camera malfunction. Nothing to worry about. But it wasn't just the glitch over the next few nights. The barking got different. Sometimes Max would stop suddenly fetter, like he saw something just at the edge of the yard, and then it disappeared. Other times he'd stare straight into the darkness without moving his head, just locked on one spot, his body tense, tail stiff. One night, I stayed awake watching the security feed live on my phone at exactly 3:17. Max started barking again. I looked out the window at the yard, still dark, still empty. The camera feed went blurry, static blooming across the screen for a few seconds. When it cleared, Max was gone, but I was watching the porch with my own eyes, and he was standing there, fur bristled. Looking out, I felt my stomach twist. How could the camera not see him? When I was right there, I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Then I noticed something else, a faint pale glow near the far corner of the yard, barely visible through the bushes. It was dim, like the light of a cell phone screen, but without any shape or source. The light pulsed slowly, almost like it was breathing. Max barked at the glow, but then the light vanished, stopped barking immediately, his whole body relaxing, as if whatever was there was gone. I kept staring into the dark, but it was empty again. I went outside after a few minutes to check nothing. No light, no footprints, no broken branches. After that night, Max's barking stopped completely. It was like nothing had ever happened. He acted normal, happy back to chasing squirrels during the day. I kept checking the cameras, hoping to see that glitch again, or the light. But the footage was normal. No static, no missing dog. Just ordinary nights. I still don't know what was there in the yard. Something I couldn't see or catch on camera. Something that made my dog bark like he did, but vanished when we tried to prove it was real. That's the part that gets me. How can something be so present and then disappear, like it was never there? I was coming in for the last pass of the day, just finishing up, spraying the far edge of the wheat field before heading back to the barn. The sun was low, just starting to dip behind the hills, so the light was golden and long, everything looking warmer and a bit softer than usual. It was the kind of evening where you almost don't want to stop flying. I'd done the field 3 or 4 times that afternoon. Nothing unusual. The plane was steady, the spray system working fine, and the only sound was the drone of the engine and the wind. My routine was tight. Line up. Low, keep the speed steady. Spray, then climb out. Turn around, and start again. I was halfway through the pass when something shifted. I was maybe 50 feet above the wheat eyes, scanning the ground to make sure the coverage was even, when I noticed this weird shimmer across the field below, like heat waves on asphalt, but cooler. Not the usual heat distortion. The wheat stalks looked bent like a ripple moving through the crops. But there was no wind, the air was still quiet except for the engine. It moved fast, gliding beneath me from one side of the field to the other, like a wave that folded the wheat down, then lifted it back up. I couldn't see a shape. No shadow or outline, just the effect it had on the plants. The ground looked like it was breathing or shifting under the surface. It was huge, way bigger than any animal or machine I knew of. Way bigger than a truck or a tractor for sure. I banked a little to get a better look. But the distortion moved with me, staying just out of sight, sliding beneath the field like something massive passing just under the surface. No sound, nothing except the wheat bending in slow waves, folding and unfolding. I checked my altimeter. Steadied, no turbulence. The plane was steady, but my heart started racing. This wasn't normal. I pulled up slightly, trying to get above it, but the shimmer didn't go away. It just kept moving, drifting slowly toward the east edge of the field. I couldn't tell how deep it was, or even if it was underwater. There wasn't any water nearby, just dirt and crops. Then the whole field kind of flickered like the distortion hit a wall or an edge. The wheat snapped back upright all at once like someone flipped a switch. The wave was gone. No ripple, no shimmer as the regular golden stalks stretching out under the fading light. Circled around, looking for any sign of what I'd just seen. No tracks, no machinery, no animals. Nothing that could have made that kind of movement without noise or visible shape. I scanned the horizon, clear sky. No clouds, no birds, no drones, or other planes. The radio was dead quiet. I thought about calling the farm, telling someone what I'd seen, but the words felt stupid. What would I even say? Hey, something big passed under my plane, but I couldn't see it. It sounded crazy, even in my head. I finished the pass, a little shaken, then headed back to land. The wheat field looked normal, peaceful. Like nothing had happened. I checked my phone when I got out. No missed calls, no messages. The sun was gone, replaced by the cold blue of early evening that night. I kept replaying what I'd seen, the way the wheat bent, the slow pulse of the distortion. The silence, I thought maybe it was a trick of the light or a weird heat mirage. But it didn't fit. I've been flying crops for years. I've seen all kinds of strange weather and odd reflections, but nothing like this. The next day, I went back to the field with a couple of the farm hands. We walked the area where the distortion had passed. No tracks, no broken stalks, no signs that anything heavy had moved through there. Recently, the dirt was dry and hard. No disturbance. A week later, I flew the same field again, same time of day. The wheat was taller now, waving in the breeze like usual. I kept an eye out for anything odd, but saw nothing. No shimmer, no waves, no ripples. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but I know what I saw. Something massive moving beneath the surface, invisible, except for the way it changed the wheat. I don't know what it was, and I'm not sure I want to, but it was real enough to throw off my landing and make me feel like I was flying over something I wasn't supposed to see. I was driving home late one night through the mountain pass. It was one of those thick fog nights where everything feels quieter, like the world's been wrapped up in cotton. I'd left a friend's place pretty late, maybe around midnight, and the roads were empty except for me. The fog had been creeping in for a while first. Just a little mist, then it got thicker the farther up the road I went. The pass is this winding stretch with steep cliffs on one side and dense trees on the other. There aren't many streetlights, just the occasional reflector post along the guardrail I was doing about 40. Careful with the slick road and low visibility. The fog made everything blurry and muted. Sounds were dull headlights. Looked like fuzzy halos, and the trees all around looked like shadows. I remember the first weird thing was the headlights. I was coming around a bend and saw a pair of bright lights up ahead. Just sitting there. At first I thought it was a car. Stopped on the side, maybe someone broken down or pulled over, but the more I looked, the less it made sense. The headlights were about 50 feet off the ground. They were just hanging there. No body of a car underneath or around them. No tires, no outline. Nothing. I slowed down, squinting through the fog, trying to figure out what I was seeing. The lights stayed perfectly still, not blinking or moving, just hovering maybe a 100 feet ahead. And definitely off the road. They were too high up to be normal headlights. They were just floating. Blinked a few times and adjusted my rearview mirror to check behind me. No other cars. No follow lights. Just my truck's dim tail lights disappearing into the fog behind. I kept driving slow and steady, but the headlights stayed there, just floating in the fog like some weird street decoration someone had put up. I wasn't thinking about aliens or anything like that, just how odd and out of place it was. As I got closer, the fog seemed thicker around the lights. The air felt heavier. The lights flickered a little. Not like a bulb going out, more like a pulse. They dimmed and brightened rhythmically, slow and even. I caught my breath, realizing this wasn't normal at all. I glanced down at the dashboard and noticed my phone had lost signal. No bars, no notifications, nothing. I tried to call my friend back, but the call didn't connect. It was like the fog was swallowing all signals too. I passed under the lights, slowly keeping my eyes on the road. But feeling like I was being watched, the temperature dropped suddenly, and the truck's heater struggled against the chill. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The light stayed above me for maybe a minute. I'm not sure how long it felt like forever, and no time at all. When I finally looked up through the windshield, I saw the headlights fade out all at once, just gone. No flicker, no fade, just nothing. After the fog thinned, and the normal yellow streetlights down the road flickered back on the air. Warmed up a bit, I looked in the rearview mirror again, but there was nothing behind me. No floating lights, no cars. I kept driving, but the feeling didn't leave me. The silence was too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Every time I glanced at the spot where the lights had been, I half expected them to pop back into view once I got down to the valley and the fog cleared. The radio buzzed back to life. My phone started picking up signal again. Nothing else happened on the drive home. The roads were just roads. The trees, just trees. I still think about those lights sometimes. What I saw, or thought I saw. There's no clear explanation. No car, no reflection, no wires. Just headlights floating in the fog. Totally detached from anything real. It didn't chase me or do anything, just hung there. Watching, I drove that pass a few times since then. Late at night, but I haven't seen anything like that again. I worked the night shift at this small weather station out in the tundra for about 2 weeks during the late fall. The place is pretty isolated, just a couple of buildings, some antennas, solar panels, and a few cameras set up to monitor the surroundings. It's so remote that the nearest town is hours away and cell service is spotty. At best, my job was mostly checking instruments, logging data, and keeping an eye on the equipment through the security cameras one night. Around 2 a.m., I was doing my usual rounds, flipping between camera feeds on the monitor in the main room. The wind was howling outside, making the temperature feel even colder. Snow had started falling lightly earlier, but it was patchy on the ground. Still more dirt and frozen grass than actual snow cover. That's when I noticed something on the northwest camera. This one faces the open tundra, just miles of flat, barren land, stretching out to the horizon. There was a figure walking slowly across the landscape. At first, I thought maybe it was a hunter, or some kind of worker out there, but the figure didn't look quite right. It was humanoid, but the shape was strange too. Tall, maybe, and the way it moved wasn't quite natural. It didn't have the usual bounciness or rhythm you'd expect from someone walking. It almost seemed like it was gliding or floating, a little above the ground. Weirdest thing was the way it appeared on the footage. The camera's motion sensor was set to record in short bursts whenever something moved. But this figure showed up with these long, flickering gaps between frames, like the camera was struggling to capture it properly. For a second, it was there, then gone for a few frames, then back flickering in and out. I started rewinding, playing the clip again, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The silhouette was dark against the gray tundra. No distinct features, but the head looked slightly elongated. It kept moving in a straight line toward the south. The whole scene was eerie, not just because of the figure, but the way the tundra around it looked slightly distorted, like the air was shimmering. I checked the camera settings to make sure it wasn't a glitch or interference. Everything was normal. The feed wasn't choppy anywhere else, just this spot where the figure appeared. I even rebooted the system, but the recording stayed the same. I didn't want to believe what my eyes were showing. so I called the other guy on the shift to watch the footage with me. He was halfway asleep, but even he agreed it looked strange. He said maybe it was some kind of animal or someone messing with the camera, but neither of us could explain the flickering or the shape. After a while, the figure disappeared beyond the range of the camera. I looked outside through the window, but the tundra was empty, quiet except for the wind. No footprints or signs anyone had been there recently. Over the next couple of nights, I kept checking that camera, hoping to catch something again, or maybe find an explanation. Nothing showed up, but every time I played back the footage from that night, the flickering gaps and the shape still gave me a weird feeling. I didn't mention it to anyone else. And when I finished my shift and left, I told myself it was probably just a trick of the light, or a technical glitch. But that figure sliding across the tundra, like it didn't belong, stuck with me. I'm still not sure what I saw, but I know it wasn't just a man or an animal. Something about it felt off. I was working the night shift at this remote communications outpost out in the middle of nowhere, way up in the mountains, where there's barely any light pollution. My job was mostly maintenance, checking signal equipment, and just keeping an eye on the place overnight. Usually, it was pretty boring, but sometimes the isolation gets to you. That night, I stepped outside around midnight to take a break. The sky was clear and full of stars. At least that's what I thought at first. I looked up just standing there with my coffee when I noticed something odd. The stars weren't steady. They started to move slowly at first, like the whole sky was spinning. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were messing with me, or I was just tired. I stared longer, trying to focus, and the movement kept going. The stars were rotating around some invisible center, and it was weirdly hypnotic. I pulled out my phone to check the time and maybe take a picture, but the screen's light suddenly felt too bright compared to the dark sky. That's when I realized it wasn't the stars moving at all. Something massive was slowly shifting in front of the sky. I couldn't see the edges clearly. It was just this enormous dark shape blotting out the stars as it moved. No lights, no noise. It wasn't like a plane or a satellite or anything I'd ever seen. I stood frozen, watching it glide silently overhead, covering more and more of the sky. The way it moved didn't feel natural either. It was smooth but deliberate, like it was aware it was being seen. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The wind picked up, but there was no sound coming from the shape itself. I kept looking around, half expecting to see some lights from a nearby town or other workers coming out, but I was alone. The outpost was a few miles away from anything else, so no one could have missed this, as the shape passed over the stars behind.